So welcome to the Scandinavian Herland Report.
Thank you.
Milo Yiannopoulos.
Oh, yeah, well, nice pronunciation.
You are one of the leading intellectuals of our time with provoking technique of fearless speech and one of the strongest defenders of free speech and Christianity and the right for us to disagree with the totalitarian, authoritarian, I would say, mainstream elites we currently have in the West. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts wrote a column, and it was just so lovely. He said, when I grew up, America used to be a nation. Today, there's only hatred. What's gone wrong in America? White hates black. Women hate men, the war in the family, the war in the workplace, and with a mainstream media such as outlets such as CNN that use all their time hating their own president. How will this society survive?
Well, they don't just hate their own president, they hate their own people too. And CNN is the worst example of inward-looking elites who don't understand the country they're reporting on and don't serve the interests of Americans. What's happened to America is, in a way, it's a victim of the First Amendment, of the right to, do, say, and be anything, because the left, the aggressive activist left, has used the First Amendment to advocate for tyranny, which is never what the founders intended. They have used their right to free speech through the campus radicals of the 60s and 70s, through political correctness of the 90s, and now social justice, the third wave feminism and Black Lives Matter of the 2010s, and inevitably the 2020s. They've used their right to aggressively express themselves, to advocate not for freedom, not for particular political values, but instead for censorship in favor of politically correct elites, as you say. So you have, the founders never intended for the First Amendment to be used to advocate for tyranny, but you have the left saying, in the most extraordinarily brazen and abusive ways when they come up with these phrases like masculinity is so fragile and kill all white men, using their First Amendment rights to advocate for the silencing of groups that have fallen out of favor. And this is something that could never have been foreseen by the people who put America together. But the state of the country as it now stands is that the First Amendment, supposedly the inalienable right of anyone here to be able to say, do, and be whatever they want, is under threat like never before. And people look to America for guidance on all kinds of matters, political, cultural, military, and otherwise. And the state of play in America is of a country split in two, down ideological lines, but mostly down identity politics lines. And this is a construction and invention of the progressive left to divide us all according to gender and race and all the rest of it. Now there are sort of two countries operating essentially independently.
Because it's very strange, because when you look at the older USA, we're from Europe, both you and I.
Yes.
And in the olden days, we used to look up to the United States because they had thought about national identity. Regardless of whichever country you originated from, you were welcome here because it was like the melting pot. But we've seen the past 10 to 15 years changed to focus on ethnic origin.
Yes, well, America, it was founded on ideas, not on skin color. And most people think of America, they think of American values. It's the free, capitalism, property rights, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom to be, do, and say whatever you want. This has changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years as the progressive left has attempted to inject gender politics and racial politics into expressions of national pride. So you have in high school, displaying the flag is being called racist by school teachers, or is it, this sort of, they're implying that a pride in national values is somehow racially suspect. Now, in Europe, given Europe's bloody history and some of the racial and religious wars that have happened in Europe, in Asia, the Middle East, whatever, there may be some justification for regarding excessive patriotism with some skepticism, because countries have typically been defined geographically and ethnically elsewhere in the world. But America was never like that. It wasn't like it until the left made it that way. And give us your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. This is written on the base of the Statue of Liberty. This was about This was written at a time when the country was about values and ideas. And everybody was welcome to come here provided they signed up to those ideas. But now you have an elite establishment in America that doesn't believe in those things. The people on CNN, many of the people in, the so-called deep state in the government, most of the academy, most, university professors, most journalists, most people working in the entertainment industry and Hollywood and music do not believe in the values on which America was founded. And now we're in a situation where America is no better than anywhere else in terms of, these sort of toxic and unpleasant wars between races, genders, and sexualities and so on. We used to look up to America because America was the highest and most perfect expression of the values that countries like the UK spread across the world: democracy, liberty, property rights, capitalism. We used to look up to America because America took all of that and ran with it, and it was the most free of all of us. It was the most capitalistic of all of us. It was the most individualistic of all of us. But it isn't anymore. And this presents a crisis for the rest of the world, because if we don't have America as a cultural superpower, showing us, demonstrating why freedom and democracy are the best system and result in the most human happiness, if we don't have America's role model out there demonstrating to the Middle East, demonstrating to China, demonstrating to Russia, demonstrating to Africa, that freedom and democracy and tolerance and pluralism, all the rest of it, are the best way to construct a society so people are happy, we're left in a very dangerous position, because not only do we not have any good role models, but nobody is actively advocating for the only system of values that we know for sure makes people happy, which is freedom and capitalism.
It's quite an extraordinary development in the West, which you're pointing to, and I would like to remind everybody of the renowned linguist Noam Chomsky, who's spoken repeatedly of the U.S. no longer being a democracy due to it's an oligarchy where a very few ultra-rich elite, who own the media, by the way, control the system. Look at, for example, the American media. Over 90% of the American media is owned by 6 corporations. And to add, half of those corporations also own the weapon industry in this country. So no wonder they need wars everywhere all the time. And it's very easy to manufacture consent, which Chomsky also speaks about, when you control the media. When you look back in the 1993, I believe, there were like 60 different groups, controlling the American media. So there's been a synchronization towards a very, very small elite. This is the problem with globalization as well, because we all had the dream. Look, the more globalized, Indians are going to get, access to the capitalist structure and all of that. But globalism has led to the 1% or the less, the 1% rising up. So we're turning into an authoritarian system.
Yes. I don't think this is a problem intrinsic to capitalism. I don't think that pure capitalism has been tried recently. This is a problem with a certain kind of Western late-stage capitalism that exists in intricate symbiosis with government. The revolving door between, political lobbyists and big business. Google lobbyists becoming government employees and then going back to the private sector again. It is that interweaving, the interlacing of government. And that's what lefties were talking about 20 years ago and talking about the military-industrial complex. It was weapons manufacturers and all the rest of it being in bed with the Republican Party. Well, they were sort of right about that. But here's the interesting thing. These days, corporate America is on the left. If you look at, CBS, for instance, that owns Simon & Schuster and, all kinds of other different media properties. Corporate America now is moving in the direction of identity politics, the direction of, the diversity, equality, kind of this parasitic parallel industry that just has suckered itself onto all of the industries in American public life. Corporate America now is far more likely to celebrate gay pride and, weird expressions of gender feminism and obsess over transgender pronouns than it is to talk about Columbus Day or whatever or to express any kind of patriotism or national pride. Just look at the NFL, even the NFL, this massive, by definition, patriotic institution, the National Football League, which wanted desperately for its own players to be able to disrespect the American anthem and flag and all the rest of it, because the people who own the NFL agreed with them. This was never the case until very recently. And it was only Trump. Trump rightly intuited that most NFL fans would be horrified by, watching a group of spoilt brat millionaires disrespecting the country that made them rich and successful on the basis of spurious political objections. Trump successfully intuited that this was not going to go down well with fans. But what that demonstrated is that, the public and Trump are on one side of the debate, and, and me and other people like us. On the other side, you don't just have the government anymore. You have big business, the academy, and the entertainment industry, all of the huge institutions of civil society, of soft power, all lined up on the pro-war, globalist side of the fence. And this is what Trump correctly identified in the last election.
It's so strange to me, too, because, look, again, both you and I are from Europe. And this system didn't work there. It hasn't worked there. That progressive dream of a global village, that we're not allowed to be proud of national identity, they've spoken about that for so long in Europe. And look at Europe is on the fringe of, really destruction. So how come the Americans, when they look around and they want to implement a new system, rather than the traditional values they had here, rather than the national identity, which made America so strong, okay, they're looking around to find something else. Then they pick the European model, which is the model that has failed in Europe.
Freedom is terrifying. It's terrifying to have every possible opportunity open to you. Rugged individualism, where you're responsible for the consequences of your actions, and you could do anything. It's very scary. People like having something to rely on, falling back on government, falling back on things that have been provided for them. Freedom is scary, and we don't have much of it in Europe, with the result that people kind of walk through life fairly blind to their own possibilities, their own potential. If you look at how quickly this sort of silly dream of, united Europe unravels at the slightest kind of economic pressure. Look at, German newspapers were putting Merkel in a Nazi uniform on their front cover, on their front pages. This is not random Greek protesters with signs. This is Greek newspapers putting Merkel as a Nazi on their front cover because of the, nonsense of the single currency union causing so many problems for Greece. This dream of some European superstate thing, unravels very fast at the slightest tension, the slightest problem. And people revert to what is the best organizing principle for human civilization, which is the nation state. People unified around a set of values and a common culture and shared history. That was always the promise of America. It was the ultimate nation state because it was based entirely on values and principles and ideas.
It's so strange because we forget history so quickly. When you look at Europe...
We're not taught it in school anymore.
This is also true. When we look at Europe, for example, what ended all the wars in Europe? In the 1600s, we had like 100 years of war there. It was the Westphalia Peace in 1649. And in this peace agreement, they defined precisely what you're stating, national sovereignty for each nation. The British were allowed now to drink whichever beer they wanted, and the French to drink whichever wine, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who wanted to be a Huguenot or whatever he wanted to be, he was allowed to be that. And you had the strength of the national identity, so whoever lived within that country was considered a full-blown citizen, regardless of color and creed. Mm-hmm. And you have the same in the Middle East, for example, with the Pan-Arabism movement. We're not going to do the Middle East, but it was the same thing. Look, instead of focusing on ethnic identity, Shia, Sunni, whatever, let's join in. Whoever lives in Syria is a citizen there. Mm-hmm. And this is what's so strange to me, because on the peak of American greatness, they choose to go down that route of looking at skin color and deeming how would skin color ever define good and bad?
Well, I agree. And in the past, of course, racists have thought that it did, have considered some, races to be inferior to others on the basis of, junk science and all the rest of it. Now, the left progressives, who always claim they were the champions of, of underrepresented minorities and people who are discriminated against, are now returning. They have thrown Martin Luther King out. I mean, it's very funny to watch the left celebrating Martin Luther King Day when they have spent the last 20 years unraveling his legacy and returning, rather than, from a world of aspirations and ideas and the contents of one's character, back to a preoccupation with skin color. And the left did that. They have spent at least the last 2 decades unraveling Martin Luther King's legacy. By today's standards, Martin Luther King is a conservative icon because he was a free speech and an individual an individualist, a free speech warrior, maybe a bit of a communist, but pretty much everybody on that side was then. And because he believed in ideas, principles, and values over superficial, skin color and sexual orientation and gender, that puts him on the right side of things by today's political compass in America, which is very remarkable. Anyway, the left now is insisting that we start to judge people again according to the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, their gender, and various other things about them that they cannot change. And this is very dangerous. And it's also, it seems to me, entirely contrary to the human spirit, to human dignity, to human ingenuity, to human potential, and to freedom. What it says is that what it does, which is so contrary to the founding principles of America, it says that your fate is tied to things that you were born with that you cannot change about yourself. And that is why I hate it. What it says is if you are born black, there's no way out except by smashing up your own town, because there's this superstructure, this cis-het white patriarchal, white supremacist construction above you, keeping you down. And why does it do that? Because freedom is terrifying, and people have to replace, their genuine oppression with something else. And now it's a sense of victimhood, now it's all the rest of it. These ideas that if you are born a woman, there is a male world out there. It's a conspiracy theory. It's this interlocking set of male-dominated systems, all of which are pointed against you, determined, to see you fail and all the rest of it. This runs contrary to the idea, that you can be anything. The essence of the American dream is that any man could be president, right? Any man could be anything. And after 8 years of having a black guy in office, when Americans should have realized that the American dream had come true, instead, now we're returning to a world where your fate is determined by the situation in which you were born. It's so depressing.
You're talking about the left, and I would like to say too, when you look back in history, back to post-war, the World War, and when these thoughts started coming up, you see that in it there is a socialist racism in the assumption that because somebody has a dark skin, you have to feel sorry for them.
There's a race. Yes, of course.
There's a racism, and look, I'm born and raised in Africa. I'm always angered over this.
I feel the same thing about gays. Same thing about gays. We're constantly
same thing about women.
Mollycoddled and pandered to. We're doing fine. Being homosexual is a competitive advantage because it makes you different and interesting and individual and gives you something to talk about. We are constantly celebrated and praised in culture. We have, of course, been replaced by transgenders as the most popular minority among liberals. So that's why I'm really mad at trannies, because they've taken our place as the special magical elves in culture. No, but it is a competitive advantage, and women working in business know this. Women who run their own businesses instead of working in HR departments, complaining about how sexist everything is because their lives aren't going well, and they've been handed a victimhood script by the left. Women who run businesses know that when they walk into the room, everybody stops what they're doing and looks and listens. And if what you have to say is powerful and effective and true, you will be listened to 10 times, more attentively than just another straight white guy wandering into the room. It is a competitive advantage being different, being unusual, being whatever. Now, the left has decided to have its cake and eat it at the same time. It wants to engineer the workplace and education against men and for women, while still claiming that women are victims, all the rest of it. This stuff is reaching a sort of absurdity, a crisis point, like a breaking point, where the science, the numbers, actual real society doesn't match the conspiracy theories that are being shared in newspapers and on TV. So the Trump election, I think, is that moment when the rift between the two sides of America starts to just become so wide that it can no longer be bridged.
And we're turning away from the old concept of equality, to be honest.
Of course.
Because equality is that I look at whoever and don't judge people according to race or gender or whatever, but acknowledge.
But your socialist racism undermines the ability of people to achieve equal results because and have equal opportunity, because you're assuming some people can't make it.
Yes.
When you do that, you punish them.
Yes.
Because what you're doing, for instance, is putting, let's say, look, nobody is denying in America that if you are black, you are more likely to be born in an economically and educationally underprivileged neighborhood. And if that is the case, you have a much harder time getting to Harvard, getting to doing what you want in your life. But the answer isn't to say, well, it's a matter of racism, so we're going to put a load of black kids who aren't smart enough into courses where they're all going to drop out, and it's going to ruin their lives because they're going to be given an opportunity they can never really fulfill. They're going to fail, and their lives are going to spiral into chaos. And at the same time, the people who don't do that, we're going to stick them. We're going to abandon them to welfare, assuming they can never do anything better and throwing money at them. The way to fix this problem is to give everybody fantastic schools, so that the best and the brightest, in a true meritocracy, can succeed regardless of skin color. The left doesn't want to do that because, I think you're right, it believes in these racist ideas that some people are not as able or as good as others, so it has to compensate for them by ensuring equality of outcome. That makes everybody miserable.
You know what they believe in? They believe in social Darwinism. We say that we're past that point. We're not at all past that point. Social Darwinism states that the white Europeans, let's say, are on the highest point of the scale, and then you have the African tribes on the lowest point of the scale. So that's what they believe. The left believes that they are the best in the world, that everybody should become like us. So this is why they look at Africans and say, we need to help you because you're not able, because you're not as high up in the social Darwinian scale as we are. So that's why I'm pointing out there's such a racism. There's in that thought, there's no equality. And the same thing they apply for women. We're automatically the victim. Who says we're automatically the victim?
My objection to this, when it's directed at people of color, as we're now obliged to call them, women and homosexuals, patronizing and mollycoddling and pandering and over-providing, over-privileging those groups in terms of affirmative action and welfare and assistance and all the rest of it, is it robs us of agency. It robs us of the motivation to accomplish in our own right because we're given too much free stuff. And when I say that being a woman or a gay is a competitive advantage, I don't say that with pleasure. I say it with reality because I as a gay man who doesn't believe in identity politics, I play with it because I know it's funny for me to have these opinions and this identity, and I like winding up the left and annoying them, saying, so I'm one of your special guys, but I don't agree with you. It's funny and all the rest of it. But being a homosexual has been a colossal competitive advantage to me, and I wish it were not. I wish I were just judged on the quality of ideas, but that's not the world we live in. And what it does for other people who are not me, what it has done for so many gay people, so many women, so many black people in America, it's robbed them of agency. It's robbed them of the motivation and determination to accomplish in their own right. Whether it is condemning them to a life on welfare, whether it is covering their accomplishments in the media as a sort of patronizing, pandering thing. It's like, oh, you're black, but you nonetheless managed to start a business. Well done you, against all the odds, eh? Because, you don't normally see black people do that.
You see the racism there.
So let's do a whole spread on black entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Why not do a spread on entrepreneurs who've made money? Because what you'll find in today's America is that black people are represented about right, Now, they're not in some places. They're not, they're overrepresented in prisons, underrepresented in education. And we need to fix that. Both of these things are problems. Both of these things are hangovers from slavery. And there's no doubt about it that black people have serious disadvantages, being born and growing up in America in all kinds of ways. But you cannot distort reality, pretending that people are doing better than they can, and all the rest. You end up hurting people more if you don't judge according to a level playing field. And here's the thing. So the OJ trial was the first time, I think, that white America saw that a black jury would refuse to convict an obviously guilty man. And this was when, so Ann Coulter says, this is when white America suddenly developed the balls to judge people according to the same standards, rather than being too terrified to say anything because they didn't want to be accused of racism. Obama unraveled all of that and started these race wars again. I wonder, and Shelby Steele wrote about this, the great black author and academic, wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal. He said the NFL protests are the first, he didn't mention OJ specifically, but he's making the same argument. The NFL protests are a moment when white America starts to judge black America by equal standards. Meaning, white people at home are saying, excuse me, you're a millionaire. You are a rich, famous, successful person who is incapable of expressing a coherent political thought, disrespecting the country and the people who have made you rich and successful. You are the living disproof of the arguments you are making. You're disrespectful, and I'm not going to stand for it. I'm not going anymore. I'm not doing these shows. That is the way to ensure that everybody treats one another with respect and with dignity and according to equal standards. And if somebody has not had equal opportunities, we should fix that. But when a rich and successful black athlete, expresses conspiracy theories while disrespecting the people who made him rich and successful, this is a situation that America, it seems, will not tolerate again, like they didn't after OJ. And that is unarguably a positive development. Has got to be a good thing. And the sorts of racism you're talking about, the sort of racism that flourished under Obama, this idea that, this group is not good enough, so we need to do this. This group is not good enough, so we need to do this. My hope is that the Trump election and this sort of populist, nationalist, anti-political correctness, anti-feminist, anti-Black Lives Matter explosion that has happened in America before, during, since, and will continue is the beginning of the end for that sort of socialist racism that you're talking about.
I once spoke to a professor. She was the first woman who went to the United States and went to Harvard and all after the war. And I asked her, that was quite a stupid question. I shouldn't have done that. I'm known as an anti-feminist at home. And I told her that must have been hard to go to the United States and be the lone woman. Mm-hmm. She was with 15 boys and then her. And she says, oh, my dear. No, this was way before the 1970s when we were told we are weak and incapable and not able. So I did splendidly. They all opened the doors for me, and they were like, I had a wonderful time. So pertaining to feminism, my question has always been, because I so love the suffragette movement. They loved the woman. They loved her womanly qualities. They loved her makeup and her, her female, like you say. A woman walks into the room, and everybody goes silent, This is our power. And that movement hailed the woman. It didn't take her out of the marriage. It didn't remove her from the family like the 70s. In the 70s, they introduced kind of like what I say, a man-hating feminism.
Yeah, that blew up in the 70s.
A family-hating feminism, and a feminism that doesn't acknowledge her body. We're supposed to not beget children, because then we have to take time out of the workforce, you see. And whatever she does in the family is not considered to be anything. She's evaluated only of what she does outside of the family. And freedom is defined by the right of the woman to step out of the marriage and away from the man. I'm just wondering, I would never like to live a life away from you guys. You guys are wonderful.
Of course we are, we're fabulous. But
you know what I mean?
I don't want to live away from men either, darling. No, but here's the thing. This is the most amazing thing that feminism has managed to persuade women of, which is they have managed to persuade women that it is men who have the power in sexual dynamics and in social situations. They have managed to persuade women that women are victims and that it's the men with the power. Well, what they've done is told people that rape and sexual assault is the default rather than the tiny aberration at the fringe. So what they're saying is we're going to tell you tons of stories about rapes, whether they happened or not, like Rolling Stone just went with that fraudster. So whether it happened or not, we're going to tell you about rapes and sexual assaults, and we're going to constantly tell you about all of this stuff for 30 years so that women think that the usual sexual interaction is with an aggressive man who doesn't respect consent, doesn't respect you, your bodily autonomy, respect you as a human being. And you are a victim. You are, by definition, you are the victim of a crime or of some other kind of social infraction. What they haven't been honest about is that 99.2% of social and sexual interactions between men and women are not like that. Most interactions between men and women are between decent, kind people who are awkward around each other, maybe at the beginning, who don't exactly know how to do things, are fumbling, stumbling their way through, working out how to communicate. And guess what? It is the woman with the power in that relationship, because the vast majority of interactions are not with rapists and sexual assaulters. The vast majority of interactions are with men and women in whose dynamic it is the woman who says whether it proceeds, and it is the woman who can make it stop. And if you roll this out to other kinds of sex, it becomes obvious to see why this is true. In gay relationships, it is the passive partner who can make it all stop, and the passive partner has the power to allow it to continue in the first place. Take it out to BDSM or whatever, it is the passive partner with the safe word. They're the ones with the power. And it's managing to convince women that they're the victims and that they are the less powerful entity in heterosexual relationships is the greatest trick that feminism ever pulled. It is a lie. It flies in the face of what every woman knows about her sexual power. It flies in the face of what every man knows, growing up as an adolescent, a 20-year-old, awkward and uncomfortable about women, working out how to approach them, how to interact with them, like how to get laid. You know, men are anxious and terrified and nervous. Women, but on the other hand, because they mature younger, by the time that everybody is getting in touch with one another at college, very often more assured, more knowing, more whatever. But feminists have told women a bunch of stuff. They've told women that they're the victims and that men are violent, abusive perpetrators who won't respect consent. They've told women that, that they should not be self-reliant, that instead they should run to the state, run to the government, run to the college. Every time there's a bad date, they should characterize it as an example of some kind of abuse or crime that's been perpetrated against them just because they felt awkward after sex. Well, he probably did too. They've told women all these things that are not true. And what they've done is create now, I think, two and a half generations of women who are radically unprepared for the real world. They are taught that the slightest brush on the knee from a guy at college represents some kind of sexual assault. What are these women going to do in the face in a dark alley at 3 a.m. with a real rapist? Because they've been taught that every slight infraction can be fixed by dad, fixed by the patriarch, fixed by college authorities, fixed by the police. It can't. And by not acknowledging that there is a small shard of darkness and a small element of danger in interactions with men that most women will experience once or twice, hopefully just that, in their lives, you're not preparing them for it, but also by suggesting that dark shard represents all men and is more typical of general interactions, you are ruining the relations between men and women. And this is some of the many ways in which feminism has made women utterly miserable and left many of them alone.
And this is how you see, too, that there's the lack of the equality there in the thinking. I've read and studied Betty Friedan and all these people. And Betty Friedan, for one, the discontentment of life, you know what I mean? She wanted to step out of marriage due to being discontented.
Yeah.
Then
most of us aren't as unhappy as feminist campaigners and activists, who are very often moved to campaign out of their own personal damage. They are driven to this by their own demons, by the darkness that they have experienced, and by their own unhappy life choices and life experiences. The majority of us are not as miserable as feminist activists and don't see the world like they do. But these people have been given uniquely powerful positions to shape how the rest of us must live.
But the problem with feminism, and then again I would point out the 1970s feminism, is really that there's such contradictions because, for one, they want the woman to become the man.
Yes.
Then she's not able to because she's not a man. Then again, the man is what they hate. But they want the woman to become the man, yet they hate precisely the man. So there's so many.
Consistent.
And then you're not allowed to be feminine. Mm-hmm. Yet feminine is what's natural to a woman to be. We shower, we take care.
It's what men want.
Yes, and we're not supposed to bear children. Yet bearing children is the greatest thing we can do. We're not supposed to wear high heels because then we're like subordinate.
Supposed to shave your armpits.
But I mean,
my God.
How am I supposed to walk properly across the floor if I don't have high heels? So what I'm trying to illustrate is that there's just this craziness in that feminism because it rips off the woman the very strengths in her sex, and it doesn't allow her to be precisely what she is. Yes. No wonder she has lost her self-esteem. I so agree with Judge Judy. Somebody was asking her in the show, are you a feminist? And she's like, I was never really into that. I'm the same. I love you guys. You know what I mean? I've never felt victimized. No. And if a guy touches I'll slap his thing and tell him
to go
get out. I mean, it's not a rape situation. I think that the more women embrace that victimhood, the more we are victims of the precise same racism that is happening towards people of color. Is thinking that since I'm a woman, you, for example, should feel sorry for me instantly because I'm a weakling. It's an offense if you think that I'm weak. That's when you're patronizing
Well,
me.
it's one of the classic characteristics of modern feminism is its low opinion of women. The idea that women need to be saved from every social interaction.
I so agree with you.
And this is the worst thing about feminism, is how low an opinion it has of women. Women need to be saved, women are weak, women are fainting couch, delicate wallflowers, who cannot cope with a bit of flirting, who cannot cope with a hand on the knee, who cannot cope with a sexist joke, or just not even sexist joke, but a joke about women, you know? Like, are you sure you're okay with that? Shouldn't I drive? Because, you know, we want to be in one piece at the end of it. Like, who cares? That the idea that this represents some kind of devastating and offensive, you know, infraction of social mores or whatever because somebody cracked a joke about spatial awareness or something, right? The idea that women cannot tolerate and should therefore not be subjected to the slightest ridicule, mockery, or even just awkwardness is so demeaning to women. It makes me furious. It's so demeaning. The idea that women need to be insulated in a bubble away from anything bad that might ever conceivably happen to them. What happens when that woman is actually confronted with a rapist? Is she in a position to help herself? Is she going to have a gun in her? Is she going to have a gun in her handbag? No. Is she going to be able to fight him off? Is she going to be able to cry for help? No, she's going to fall apart. She's going to be a mess. She's going to be a victim in that situation because she has been trained to believe she is one. I just think that in a country like in America now, where more than half of college applications, graduates, all the rest of it are women. Women are going in unprecedented numbers, more than men. Higher literacy rates, higher grades at college, and all the rest of it. Women are outpacing men in every conceivable metric in education. There are more scholarships for them. They are graduating more subjects, all the rest of it. They're still not happy because they're inventing some conspiracy about women being kept from doing computer science and physics, even though women totally dominate biology and veterinary medicine. Because they want women to choose to dominate everything, you know, rather than choosing what they want to do. I just think in a world in which the data, the evidence suggests that women are outpacing men in every conceivable way, we don't need to keep patronizing and pandering to women, telling them that they are inferior and victims and that the world is out to get them, when all the evidence says the opposite.
You know what? I'm just angry listening to you, really. It angers me.
It makes me mad, too.
It angers me because I'm not Bambi, you know what I mean? This is not a Disney movie.
This is their idea. Their idea is that you are Bambi and you need to be cosseted and protected and ushered through life with with cushions around you.
I want equality. That's what I want, you know, to be treated. And it's a paradox.
Equal access to education, get paid the same, have the same opportunities in the workplace, and be able to choose your own fate. And those are the things that women deserve, and those are the things that women have had for decades.
And when it comes to equal pay, for example, you see that the women who choose, they want to choose to become a nurse, let's say. That's what she wants. She wants to help the elderly. You know how we're so caring and all of that? So we don't choose to become the CEO of an international company.
Women don't want to spend those kinds of hours doing stuff like that.
Those hours are like, so we don't. So when they speak about equal pay, this is just the natural way in the system. If you want equal pay, then you must choose the CEO position, or else you know what you can do? You can choose to do what you love, and you can love yourself as you do what you love, which is caring for the old.
You could care for people, whatever.
You know what I mean?
Here's the thing. I don't know if you know about this, but when they look at the gender split in certain subjects, in countries like Pakistan, where women don't have access to education, when they do get into education, they feel intense economic pressure to provide for themselves or whatever. They choose according to economic outcome, right? Women just as much as men. So women will choose the majors that will result in higher paying jobs because of the economic pressures, because they're in developing countries. So if you look at Pakistan, Bangladesh, whatever, women studying physics and maths they have a much closer gender parity, yeah? In richer nations, in nations where women have all of the opportunities in the world, their choices actually narrow. When you give women more freedom, more rights, more opportunities, they actually choose a more narrow range of things. They choose veterinary medicine. They choose nursing. They choose social care. They choose all kinds of things that suit what and who they are.
This is because we love those lines of
But
work.
when women, this is a great irony that people never realize. There's a great irony in education that feminists will never be able to fix, which is the freer women get, the freer they are to choose, the more narrow their choices get, because they're finally able to do what they want instead of what they have to do.
But this is the tyranny of the feminism we've had since the 70s. They've really been very totalitarian, and especially woman on woman, because the feminists will not allow other women to choose as they please, because they have their system. You have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 divorced, 2
miserable, single, working in New York with a cat and a tiny apartment in a miserable life at the age of 40, hating yourself, hating your friends, hating everything around you. That's happiness in feminism. You know, that is a woman, you know, a strong, independent woman living according to her own whatever. That's what feminism wants. It wants women to be miserable and alone.
And in Europe, for example, we've said, okay, look, she shouldn't stay in the marriage because then she's under the patriarchy, so let her divorce her husband. And then do what? Then be a single mother, with a double pay. I mean, you're poor in that situation, and then what does she do? Then she goes to the state to receive the welfare money. So we've seen a change where the woman...
From one patriarch to another.
Yes, and at least...
The only difference is I have to pay for you instead of your husband.
Yes, and at least you get sex in the first version.
Right,
you know what I mean? It's a little bit
affection.
hard to have sex with the state. So you're there alone, and then but still paid. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And then she's told to, okay, go around and have partners all over the place, and the children growing up with all these Uncle John and Uncle Peter and all these uncles, and which causes also an unrestful and not, you know, secure personality and identity also in the children.
All of the evidence we have and everything that I am reading on this subject is telling me that hookup culture, that promiscuous sexual relations, women aren't happy when they get involved. They're perfectly capable and able to do it, and they should be free to choose if they want to. But the women who do choose to live like that aren't happy. And if you look at, there was a piece in New York Magazine just a day or two ago about a Harvard student who said that she was involved in a completely consensual sexual encounter at a party. And afterwards she felt depressed and miserable and disgusting, and she didn't like it. Look at the allegations against Aziz Ansari a few days ago, this woman, Grace, who said that after the awkward encounter, the bad date, that's all it was a bad date, she felt justified in going to the press and destroying his reputation and calling him a, you know, whatever, because she felt uncomfortable about herself, about her own actions. These women who are engaging in promiscuous hookup culture, right? I'm not judging them morally, although I could and I would, and I don't think they should be doing it because I don't think that it is the right way to live. But they're entitled to do it and they should have the freedom to do it. All that I'm saying is it isn't going to make them happy. And we're seeing it now. Women have total sexual freedom and total sexual liberation. They can be whores and sluts just like men can be players and whatever, right? When they do so, on the whole, in general, they tend to be miserable. And now they have the whole sexual smorgasbord on their, you know, ahead in front of them. And they can pick and choose and they can sleep around as much as they want. It seems to be the case that the women who do end up unhappy and end up alone. And my sadness really is for the women who have listened to feminism, who have been encouraged to say, look, men can behave like this. When a man does it, he's just a player. When a woman does it, she's a whore, whatever. Well, maybe those social stigmas have grown up over hundreds of years because certain things suit men that don't suit women. And women who behave in that way are unusual because it runs counter to how most women will be happy. And
when you look at the statistics as well on these issues, you see that, first of all, who has the more sex? Those that are married. Who live the longer, years longer? Those that are married.
And these are happiness indicators, wellness, well-being indicators.
When you sleep with somebody that loves you, it's a whole other ball game than when you know that guy just comes in the room, does his thing, and you don't even remember his name or whatever.
And you don't know, and you fall asleep and you wake up and he's gone. And
yeah, and imagine the impact on psychology.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I absolutely believe that.
So imagine, I mean, marriage. I'm married. I have a naked man in my bed every night. Imagine what I can do to him all the time. This is like the dream. It's like my dream come true. It's my American dream. I have that guy close to me, and to cultivate that and know that I live a life in which I'm loved. And I think the question of love should spill into this.
Well, feminism
because
is loveless.
We speak about individualism, my right to do whatever I want and sexually and whatever. Okay, I have the right, like you say, but what would suit me deeply, both spiritually and as well psychologically.
And I think women have that need for that kind of companionship and love very, very deeply.
Yes,
maybe
we do.
More so than men.
I think maybe.
I think that men deal better
Yes.
with being alone, let's say in their 30s.
Maybe.
The women that I know who are single in their 30s are not happy. Plenty of men who I know who are single in their 30s are perfectly fine.
You know,
And men can retreat into casual sex, video games, porn, sports, each other's company, drinking, all the rest of it. Women who do those things, I can see how miserable they are.
you know, traditionally, a man was described like he has two, like when you play a piano, there's like just two. Two.
Fingers,
One
yeah.
is food. One is food, and the second one is sex. If he gets food and sex, he's fine.
Yes.
But the woman has the whole piano.
Yeah, she sees the whole scale. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I'd be perfectly comfortable believing that. And maybe my gay brain is a little bit closer to women than most men because I feel a little of that too. And I'm married now. I have the same deep sense of of security and comfort and all the rest of it. And I recognize in myself, that's a bit of my psychology that maybe I share with women, which is maybe why I understand this stuff better than some other people. But it just makes me very sad to see women driven into lifestyles that I know are going to make them miserable by these man-hating lesbianic harpies who obviously hate men themselves and want the rest of the species to suffer and hurt as much as they're suffering and hurting. And what we've done in culture, and this to return to how we started this conversation, with the elites who are so out of step with what the rest of us believe, what we've done in culture is give privileged status to the people who deserve it the least to lecture the rest of us on how we should live. We've done it in politics, where career politicians with no understanding or knowledge or connection to, real life and real people, with the result that none of them are talking about immigration, despite the fact that it is killing, working class wages and jobs for whites, blacks, and what have you. There's no connection to that. And it takes someone like Donald Trump to start people speaking honestly about immigration. No connection whatsoever. The academy, which is supposed to be an elite, and I get that, but the entertainment industry, which is supposed to speak to ordinary people's feelings, the music business, journalism, which is supposed to serve the people over the elites, which has become just another branch of elitist power. All of these people are privileging the opinions and lifestyles and politics of the least qualified people in society to speak to how the rest of us should live. Whether it is globalists in politics that are compromised by their business connections, whether it is professional race baiters with no real interest in racial harmony but a lot of interest in their pocketbooks, or whether it is professional feminist malcontents who are determined to make men suffer and to make other women as miserable as they are. And these are the people who are now laying down social norms for the rest of us.
And the tyranny of it all is that two opinions are allowed, or rather one. You have, like you say, the gay community, you have the women, I'm a woman, and you have some groups in society that are loved. But it's a one-sided biasness that doesn't allow the plurality. This is what I also don't understand with the political correctness of today. It seems that plurality of opinion has become the enemy of state.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you have, in a system where you, probably before you had... let's say the gay community being, discriminated against. Now you have the community having the right to discriminate others. We shouldn't have it that way. It should be all of us in a diversity that could live together, and we should respect each other's differences.
The way that the progressive stuff works is we were discriminated against for decades, therefore it's your turn now, and we're going to get revenge. When surely the situation ought to be men and women need each other. Blacks and whites in America need each other. Gays and straights need each other. Just, in ways, just in terms of cohesive society. Like, I have to go and get a cab, it's going to be driven by somebody who isn't necessarily gay. We cannot segregate ourselves into these self-contained little ghettos, these communities, these internal little universes, right? We have to get on with everybody because everybody needs everybody else. And most specifically and especially, men need women. Of course we do. Not just cold things like the perpetuation of the species, but to be happy. Of course, well, here's not all of us. And the people who don't love it, the people who are suspicious and resentful and miserable and inward-looking and jealous and resentful are the people who are now telling us, those of us who have healthy relationships with the opposite sex,
how we should be approaching our lives. And that's very miserable and depressing and horrible. And the idea, as we started with, this collapse of free speech is part of the collapse of the replacement of freedom and free expression and reason, rationality, classical liberalism, with identity-based resentment and politics. The idea that your skin color matters more than the ideas in your head, which is what we started the discussion with, is where this stuff comes from, and it is so destructive.
The problem with freedom of speech today is that it means something completely different from its original meaning. I mean, the original meaning being you're supposed to be allowed to finish your speech, you know? And you're supposed to be respected for having a different opinion.
Yes.
Yet free speech today has turned into the right to bully those you disagree with.
Yes. And very often the victims are called the bullies and vice versa. So Twitter, for instance, which used to advertise itself as the free speech wing of the free speech party, now defines free speech as the right of minorities not to be bullied into silence by whatever. But what they don't realize is that the American popular culture is run by progressives. If there is a bullied faction, just like it is on college campuses, it's conservatives, you know? And Twitter is perpetuating that, calling the victims the perpetrators and calling the perpetrators the victims. And it is that inversion, that Kafkaesque inversion of trajectory, where the people doing it, and the same thing, Oprah, right? That giving absolution at the Golden Globe, saying, oh, the brave men and women in this room who are whatever, they're the people who did this. Calling the victims perpetrators and calling the perpetrators victims has become a classic characteristic of modern progressive life.
And this is why you should read my book, The Culture War, How the West Lost Its Greatness, because in that book, I'm analyzing the development in the West. And one of the things that points in the direction showing you are correct in your analysis of the left is that when you look at the ideologists of the Frankfurter School post-World War II, and the same guys, of course, Derrida, Jacques Derrida, and these people, Adorno, went on to be the leaders. Marcuse became the leaders of the founding fathers of the 1968 revolution of free sex and free and abortion and all that. They stated in their writing the necessity to stop the free speech of those they didn't agree with.
This is Marcuse, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
they
he said it's perfect. He said censorship is a route to liberation. Censorship's a route to freedom. This weird postmodern French, inversion of values, turning things on their head. These intellectual games that became culture.
And remember,
this is Marcuse, yeah.
Yes, and which nation did these guys come from? They came all from Germany. They were there pre-war. They were there after the Second World War. The same guys were the founding fathers of the EU, which I often say is a socialist, a regionalism, really.
Of course, yeah.
They all moved to the United States, so we do see that the pool of thought coming out of Germany, one of its branches turning into national socialism, by the way. The Nazi Party, obviously, everybody knows that. That was a left-wing movement. Today they say they were ultra-right or whatever. It was a left-wing movement when you look at Hitler. It was a strong propaganda structure. Everybody had to drive the same car. Nobody were allowed to say anything else than what the state decided they were allowed to. Everybody hated Christianity of the Nazi movement. And when you see post-war Europe, didn't really change their ideology that much. The Marxists now label themselves as neo-Marxist. I'm not saying they were not right in protesting against some of the bourgeoisie things happening in the, wherever you have power, you always have the abuse of power, whether religious people, atheists, whoever, black, white, whatever, is at the top of a scale. So I'm not saying that. They were right in protesting. But it's just a current that goes from Germany and into our leftist thinking today. And we see the same propaganda ministerium. For God's sake, what is CNN? Which nation is able to push the hatred to that degree against their own president? Obviously, he does a lot of mistakes, President Trump, I'm not saying. So did Obama. But the degree of hatred, what is it with these people? Do they want to create civil war in this country?
I think
is
they,
that
I think
the
they do.
end goal?
I think they do.
Think
and, it can't be a coincidence. You told me today 90% of the media is controlled by 6 corporations. It cannot be a coincidence that 2 days ago, a study came out that showed that 90% of coverage of President Trump was relentlessly hostile, relentlessly negative. You know, it's the same number.
And what's the role of Christianity in all of this?
Christianity is being sort of systematically exterminated across the West in favor of this mollycoddling to Islam. And the reason is enemy of my enemy is my friend. You know, the way you know, by the way, it's kind of like a boomer soundbite, like the Nazis were left-wing, not right-wing, and young people are like, oh, really? But it's true, and the way you know that is they had a pact with Islam, just like feminists and progressives today. Why? Because what all of these ideologies have in common is a hatred of freedom. In Christianity, everywhere you look in the world is a bulwark against tyranny. If you look at the oppression of Christians in China, in the Middle East, everywhere that tyranny is asserting itself, Christianity must be eradicated, because Christianity is a fountain of individualism. Christianity didn't just exist in intricate symbiosis, you know, with capitalism and with, you know, with freedom and democracy and all the rest of it. They all fueled each other. Capitalism is impossible without the Protestant work ethic, and you know, and many of these systems that underpin the success and freedom of the West didn't happen in spite of Christianity. They happened alongside and in some cases because of Christian values. And that's why when you look at tyrannous regimes elsewhere in the world, one of their number one priorities is the extermination of Christianity. A Coptic Christian was murdered in Egypt just this weekend. It happens all the time. The murder of Christians goes completely unreported on. Meanwhile, at home, in our own countries, Germany is tearing down churches while mosques go up at an unprecedented rate. Sweden is taking the crosses off the front of churches so as not to offend their new, Muslim immigrants who just turned Malmo into the rape capital of Europe. In America, Christians have been bullied and ridiculed and demeaned in popular culture for decades in a way that no progressive would dare to do about Islam. And then I go up on stage and tell a few jokes about Islam, and I become, persona non grata, public enemy number one, because that's the third rail you can't touch. And suddenly people care about, offending the rights of religious minorities and the rest of it. Where were you when Christian bakers were being bullied and demeaned and humiliated not because they were out there on the streets protesting against, gays or whatever, those days are over, but because a reporter called them up, aggressively called around every Christian business they could find and said, would you do a lesbian wedding? Would you do a lesbian wedding? Would you do a lesbian wedding? And that they find one, finally, in the Midwest. Congratulations, we found one, guys. One pizzeria who said, we prefer not to do a lesbian wedding, and it becomes a circus. And look at these backward bigots. How dare you? How dare you? I have received nothing as a gay man, a very famously gay man, and a very, everybody who's heard my name knows I'm gay. I have been on the receiving end of nothing but compassion and love and prayers from people of faith, except one faith, of course. And on the receiving end of nothing but vitriol and spite and horror, and really horror. It's a horror show of behavior. What progressives will do to gay people who go off reservation or people of faith. And being a Christian and a gay guy with the wrong opinions has turned me into public enemy number one for progressives in America. I have been on the receiving end of such vicious horror from the left and from the coasts in this country versus when I did my college tour. I was in Tennessee, I was in Louisiana, I was in all these, and I would get off a bus with a picture of my face on it and the word faggot on the side of the bus in massive letters, and I would be dressed ridiculously. And people in Louisiana and Tennessee would come up to me and say, I don't agree with everything to do with your lifestyle, but I'll pray for you, and I think what you're doing is great. This is compassion. The worst you could say about it is a bit patronizing, but what it really is compassion and love. The idea that the West, this is why conservatives say that we are culturally suicidal in the West, right? Because we are charging headlong into a future that makes Christianity publicly impossible, and which makes excuses for a murderous ideology like Islam.
And this is such a paradox and such an elitism and such an authoritarian state that we're in, because when you look at the numbers, 75% of the European people state that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, born of the Virgin Mary. Around 80% of the American people say they believe in God and in Jesus. So in other words, when you have such despicable attitudes towards the whole, the broad part of society, what does that tell you of the elitism that we live under? Look, a democracy is supposed to be something that defends the voice of the people. Right. You're supposed to respect the people. What is the difference between a democracy and a tyranny? A tyranny is a state where only the elite respects. So we're turning into something, and this is such a deep
And if you look at the political attitudes of the journalism industry, which is 80 to 90% Democrat and 10% Republican, versus the 50-50 split in the population. Look at atheism in journalism versus the religious attitudes that you're talking about among the rest of the population, and you get just a little window into. And journalists, by the way, are not the worst of it. Wait until you start talking to college professors, who are teaching young people, who are teaching the entire generation that will run the government, run the entertainment industry, run newspapers, run the media, run business. The entire generation is being taught by people who are even further to the left, even more out of touch with the concerns of ordinary people. But journalism just gives you a little window, just a little peek into how out of touch the elites are with popular opinion. And you only need to look at the political attitudes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's where you see the danger towards civil war, really, because at what point will the population be so sick and tired of this? I so love the European atheist, Jürgen Habermas. He's done such excellent work of the need for representation of each group, for everybody to be heard in secular society. He's a wonderful man. But he changed his view on religion a few years ago, and I'm writing about that in the book as well, and I've done a lot of work on that. And what he states, he's still an atheist, but he states that since we removed the Christian thought, the 10 Commandments, look, don't steal, man, don't take my stuff, don't lie to me. We have to have a society where we are reliable and can trust each other. Don't envy me. Be humble and love me. I mean, we're supposed to lift each other up, yes, not tear each other down, for example. When you remove those 10 commandments from society and it becomes socially acceptable to only be egoistic, think about yourself, who cares about other people, just take their stuff, just demean them, speak evil of them, then what he states is that we have seen in secular society that ability of Christianity to motivate individuals, right, to love one another is removed. And we cannot function. This is the spiritual side of us. We're not just a body. And this is why I think why many people in the West are so unhappy today. It's because we don't cultivate the spiritual side.
Absolutely
we
right.
only cultivate, let's have sex or whatever, and the physical side of it. And the richer you are, the more you're like a fancy guy or whatever. There's a limit to it. Some of the world's richest people are some of the world's saddest people. There are values outside of this narrow scope. And when we look at Christianity too, and what it brought to Western civilization, the whole idea of equality, for example, regardless of gender.
Consent
yes,
comes from the church. The idea of consent,
yes,
the idea of marriage as Marriage as a union between a man and a woman in which the woman must consent to that union is an invention of the Christian church.
You see?
Giving women consent to marriage and to everything is a Christian innovation, Nobody knows that. Nobody knows that.
Yeah, and I'm from the Viking culture. And in the Scandinavian Viking culture, it was ended the minute Christianity came to our culture. It became, first of all, like one man and one woman. Secondly, they were not allowed anymore to kill the kids, the children they didn't want. They just put them out for the wolf. That was forbidden by law. And you got the orderly...
50, 60 years ago?
Let me tell you. Yes, I know. I know. But there's so much to this that...
And here's the worst thing. When you remove Christianity from public life, you don't just leave a void, which makes people unhappy, and you don't have a collapse. It's not like the rest of civilization just crumbles and fills the gap. No. You leave a hole that has to be filled by something else, because we as human beings, just look at art, we have a need for the divine, for the ineffable, for something greater than ourselves. We seek out the transcendent.
It's in us.
It's in us to seek something bigger and greater than ourselves and each other, right?
And thank goodness.
Some people will find that in religion and call it God, okay? That if you take religion out of the equation, you don't just collapse everything else around it and remove the need for spirituality. What you do is open up a space for something worse to move in. And in education, in history, the purpose of higher education, the purpose of universities was to explore the world God had made for us. Because if God made it, then it must be worthy of our consideration and our investigation. The founding statement of Yale University, the founding principle of Yale, was to educate people in this world so that they did not fall into the ignorance that leads them to the devil, right? If you take Christianity, if you remove it as the organizational principle behind education, you have to replace it with something else. People will seek out something else, and they have replaced it with something else. They've replaced it with social justice, which is a Marxism mapped onto cultural issues, which defines the world in terms of oppressors and oppressed, Social justice, modern feminism, Black Lives Matter, all of these movements, this obsessive two-dimensional quest to see racism, sexism, bigotry and everything, to work out what the power relationships are and who's being oppressed. This is economic Marxism mapped onto social issues, and it has become the soul of the American higher education establishment instead of Christianity, and that's why they're in such crisis. That's why they're in such a mess. That's why the state of free speech on college campuses is as it is, because religion has been replaced as the central organizing principle, as the prime mover behind our curiosity about the world, by this awful prism, this lens of, is it sexist, is it racist, is it homophobic? The social justice lens, the mapping of Marxism, of socialism onto cultural issues. Cultural Marxism is what they call it. This has become now the central organizing principle of American higher education, and it is so hollow and miserable and pointless. And this is why people who study literature come out of it saying they hate the books they read. Why? Because they're taught to hate. They're taught to find the ugliness in things instead of finding the beauty and joy in things. They're taught to hate the texts because they're taught to find in literature who's abusing and oppressing whom, rather than how does this teach me about my experience and about the world around me.
And then we get to the next problem, because the next problem is also that the Christianity we have today, the institutionalized Christianity, has also become politically correct. This is why when you look at studies, you see so many of...
Catholics invented social justice, I mean, we are responsible for it. We've just let it get carried away.
Yeah, because that's a problem, I think, also that lends many people, they become atheists as well, because they see the hypocrisy within the Christian community. So what is needed, I would say, is to get back to the old guy in the sandals, the one of whom Mahatma Gandhi spoke and say was the greatest teacher in the world, Jesus. That guy who went around brown-skinned as he was, no blonde hair like me and blue eyes. This was a brown boy, you know what I mean? And he taught the most revolutionary message in the world. You love one another. Don't hate each other. Love one another. And I think that's the most important message. And on that note, Sir, Mr. Milo Yiannopoulos.
This has been delightful.
I would like to thank you for joining us here, and Efharisto Boli for you to come here. And God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you so much for having me.